Hello athletes, Travis here, back with another training talk. I had a little topic kind of brewing in my mind and I wanted to share it with you. So today we are going to be talking about nerves and nervousness, something that every athlete deals with to varying degrees of success, especially prevalent, I think, in racing sports where the goal of that race is to push yourself to the limit, and that is a nerve-wracking proposition. And we're going to be talking today a little bit about kind of how I personally deal with nerves and nervousness, how I kind of work with my athletes to deal with their nerves and nervousness, and hopefully kind of give you guys some strategies to kind of set yourself up psychologically to be ready to move through the kind of those phases leading up to a competition or even a hard training session, so that you can get the most out of your performance and that you're not distracted by that kind of natural sense of anxiety. And so to start, I think the most important here is to recognize nervousness for what it is, and that is at its core simply a fear of failure. All right, and so how you define failure is going to go a long way to managing your nerves and your nervousness leading up to a race. All right, and that can both be kind of simply of how you're thinking about what your goals are for that race. It also plays a lot into the preparation for that event, whether it is a race or whether it is a training session. But ultimately, I find one of the biggest failures that most athletes have is an inability to set goals. All right, and not say I want to do well at this race or I want to do it that well at that race, but to set realistic goals, to understand where they are, what their capabilities are, what the threshold of those capabilities are, and then when it's appropriate to push themselves to that threshold and when it's appropriate to challenge those thresholds. That ultimately, I think, is at the core of the success of most athletes and the lack of success with other athletes that can never quite get over that performance anxiety and that fear of failure. And when it's coming to training, that's simply understanding, like I just said, understanding where you are, all right? And a lot of people, especially youth athletes, they will set their goals based on what other people are doing and where they want to be with that perspective of where other people are. And there's a almost complete disregard for their own personal state in the moment, their personal state of fitness, and their own history, all right? And so when you're setting goals, you need to be aware of kind of where you want to be, but you also have to have a respect for the amount of time that it takes to get there and the amount of work that it takes to get there. And again, this is another big issue that youth athletes have, is because they want things quick, all right? And so you take a teenager, they've only had 15 years of life, and let's say probably the last 5 years of that life is really salient to their personal experience. And so if you talk to a youth athlete about setting goals that might take 2 years to achieve, that is an enormous ask compared to someone like myself, who coming back into training at 38 was setting goals 2, 3, 4 years out for how long I would expect to take to kind of bridge from where I was currently to where I was going to be. All right, so at that time, that was only maybe an eighth of kind of my lived time and experience, an eighth or less, depending on whether we're talking about 1, 2, or 4 year goals. And so we got to understand that, and especially for coaches of youth athletes, for parents of youth athletes, and for youth athletes themselves, of kind of appreciating kind of that ask, all right? But that being said, you also have to understand and appreciate that it takes time to kind of reach places, all right? And also that idea that you cannot set your goals based on what other people are doing. You have to work 100% within the context of where you've been and where you are, all right? Where you've been, where you are psychologically as well as physically with your training. And so one, it's that expectation of setting those expectations, and that's where like things like training logs are invaluable, all right? And I talk to my youth athletes a lot, and even my adult athletes of the value of keeping a training log to kind of know where you've been, because I think our instinct is to rely too much on memory and the precision of memory, and I certainly suffer from that as I've gotten older. But even when you're young, you don't remember, you remember broader things, you don't remember minute details. And certainly when you get to an athletic place where you are at a higher level of performance, improvements are very small. They're tenths of a second here, they're tenths of a second there. And it's just not reasonable to expect that you're going to be able to remember exactly to the tenth or to the meter, what your performance was on 6 or 8 intervals on a workout 2 weeks before, a month before, much less more. All right, and so a training log is going to be very important for helping you frame your previous performance and then use that to set your goals and expectations for your present performance. All right, and then that is kind of the expectation. All right, so if you're taking something like a steady state workouts, for example, those are the ones that we're doing the most. It is kind of knowing where you are in your steady state, appreciating that every steady state isn't going to be faster than the one before, that it's more of a scatter plot of improvement over time. That if you know kind of where you've been, and you can take all that data for the last 3 months and track those splits that you're holding on that steady state as a final average, you should be able to kind of track on a scatter plot a path of progress. And so as long as you're kind of close and within the kind of normal deviation of that path of improvement, then you're in a good place. All right, whereas if you're not keeping track of that, if you're not measuring it, and you're just saying, well, I remember my best ever steady state was a 201.2, and so anything less than a 201.2 is a failed steady state, then you're just setting yourself up for failure and frustration, because it's not realistic goal setting. And then when it comes to doing things like pieces and workouts, if you have that training log and last time you did 3-minute pieces, you started out at a 148.6, and then your last one was a 144.7, and you have the split that you had on each of those 3-minute pieces, then you can sit down and you can say, well, last time I started at around a high 148 split, so I'm going to sit down, I'm going to ease in, I'm going to try to hit that 148. And what you'll find is that if you're stronger, you'll naturally incline to the low end of that average. So you'll come out with something like a 148.3 instead of a 148.7. And then the next interval, you can go again. And let's say your next interval was a 147.9. And then you do it again and you see your 147.5. All right. And so with each one, you can kind of track very small portions of progress, because you have that record in the past. Whereas what most people will do is they'll do their workout, they'll start at that 148.7, they'll finish at that, let's say 144.6, whatever I just said. Their average is 146 on that, and so they'll come in and that's what they'll remember. They're like, I averaged 146, first piece 146. All right, and then they're going to try to build from there, and then they're probably going to hit a wall and collapse, because it's not reasonable to expect you to drop a full 2 seconds on your average if you're an experienced athlete. Granted, if you're a novice athlete, that's a different story, but as a coach, you're going to want to be more involved with that goal setting and that pacing for the novice athlete than you will for the varsity athletes, which should be capable of setting their own paces based on that training log and their history and their understanding of their body. All right, so that goal setting in workouts is going to be key, and keeping a training log is going to be key for it. Now, getting into kind of a more broader scheme in terms of racing and just the general sense of nervousness, which I think a lot of you came in and you're like, that was the expectation of what we were talking about. I go back to that training log and to that experience. And so for me, in my personal experience with the time leading up to a race and being nervous and doubting if I will be able to kind of push myself in the way that I want to be able to push myself, that experience and that knowledge of what I've done in the past is what I use to kind of help push me through that sense of nervousness. All right, so it is a manufactured confidence in my ability by tracking and being aware of that ability over time. All right, if it's in terms of racing where you're not on an erg and you can't be able to see and track those things, it is looking back to your success on the water before and understanding what you have achieved on that water and what you've done kind of in those moments, and making sure that you're setting yourself up to repeat that. All right, so if I go into a race, every time I race on the water, I am nervous about putting too much energy into the start and fading and dying and having that kind of that quit in me, in that third 500 meters or so. And so for me, kind of what I do to think about that, and am I going to give in to that quit in that third, fourth 500 meters? It is a understanding and experience of pacing myself through those early stages, and then looking back and asking myself, have I done that before? When I'm in that position, to quit, do I quit? And knowing for me, that no, like when push comes to shove, I'm able to step up and I'm able to do that. And so knowing in the past, knowing that when I've been under that pressure in the past and I've made the right decision, that is kind of what helps kind of push me through that kind of nervousness and that doubt. All right, is this repeated repeated successful response to kind of that negative stimulus and that negative desire. And then my job, I can kind of isolate, and this is another part of kind of dealing with nervousness, is to partition your expectations. Certainly in a race is like set goals for different parts in that race. And so I know for me, if I get in a good start in a race and I set a good rhythm, that no matter how hard it is, that I'm going to be making the right decisions as I move on. And so I take that, and instead of focusing on the race as a whole, which can be very overwhelming, I just try to focus on that first 300 meters. All right. And sometimes I even say those first 3 strokes. And I've definitely done this with my athletes before, leading up into big important races such as a club national championship, is I will say, just take 3 very clean strokes at the front end. Focus on being together, focus on being clean, and then that rhythm that you've set, all right, that what you establish in those first 3 strokes will then cascade into what goes on. And so that ability to simply take your mind off the whole, all right, and to focus on small parts, small achievable parts, all right, because getting 3 strokes good, clean, relaxed, effective at the start of a race is far easier of an ask than saying, well, you got to be pushing this hard at this part of the race, and you got to be making a move here, and you got to be able to respond to what's happening there. You got to be aware when you get to this part of the race, that's when we're going to start to press towards the finish. That is overwhelming, all right? And so it's one, keeping things simple, both in terms of where we're focusing to start, and 2, keeping things simple in terms of the overall plan, all right, so that there's not a lot to think about. It is very simple, 3-4 things to focus on going into a race, all right. And then when it's have that little kind of devil on your shoulder saying, oh, this is hard, you can't do it, or what if you fail, of just saying, well, you know what, I can get step 1, and once I've got step 1, then I can focus on step 2. All right, once I got step 2, I can focus on step 3. Once I've got step 3, I can focus on step 4, which is probably one of the easiest steps, or at least it is for me, because at the end of the step 4, you're done. All right, you don't have to worry about it. The pain is over. You don't have to keep, well, the pain's not over, but you don't have to keep forcing yourself to push. All right, and so for me, that is kind of the easiest part of the race, to kind of motivate myself when that finish line is kind of within grasp. All right, and granted, that assumes that I have set a reasonable expectation and plan for the early part of the races, because how you approach the finish is going to be very different if you pace yourself well, so that you can finish with aggression, rather than if you pace yourself poorly and you're finishing just trying to survive. All right, and that is something that you can train in training. All right, and that is something I think that you need to drill in your workouts. And for me, almost every workout, 98%, 99% of workouts should all be meticulously paced for negative split and an increase of confidence and aggression as you go through, because you've set yourself up to continue pushing and continue being successful the closer you get to that finish line. All right, so whether it's steady state, all right, generally with UT2 I say finish your warm-up, and then once you get into the body of your UT2, you know, generally there should be a 4 to 6 second range between what that split is coming out of your warm-up and what that split is at the end of it. All right, because as you warm up through that UT2, you're getting more and more loose, your muscles are getting more and more supple, and then you're going to be able to create more power with the same amount of effort. All right, you know, if you're sitting down a steady state and it's just, you know, 1 second, within 1 second the whole time, I know a lot of people that's like their flex. Certainly on kind of Reddit where I post a lot of these, a lot of people will post their steady state where they're trying to get the same split, the same stroke rate the whole way through. That's not well executed steady state, or not well executed UT2. All right, well executed UT2 is one that kind of ramps gradually over time. All right, and generally the longer you row UT2, the faster you're going to be at the end. All right, which is counterproductive for too many people. All right, UT1 is the same principle, it's just a more narrow range. All right, so UT2 or UT1, generally I say you want to be finishing your warm-up and going into the body of that UT2 workout maybe about 3 or 4 seconds slower than the split that you're going to end at. All right, so still a progression, but it's a little bit more narrow. All right, and then when you're doing pieces and intervals, I definitely kind of plan and structure in those pieces and intervals a progression of speed as you go through, and I do that mainly through stroke rate. You know, and so stroke rate will increase through that workout so that we're getting a little bit faster each time, and that's an easy way to ensure that you can kind of ramp up the speed without really holding back, that you can still kind of settle in and get into a good rhythm. But again, both in a race and during an anaerobic work session, I will always tell my athletes, don't seek out the pain. All right, the pain will come. All right, the effort will come. All right, so don't force it in the beginning. All right, and so generally you want to be in a race. In a race, you don't necessarily want to ramp up as much because you've gotten a big warm up in. You want to be nice and steady in a race, but a race is a concise effort. All right, and so with that race, you want to get in there, you want to get into that effort, and if your goal is a 145 split, for that, your average in that, you've got to assume that that 145 is going to be fairly easy to hold for a good majority of that early part of that race, and it's only going to get extremely difficult to hold in that later part of the race. All right, with that middle part being challenge, an achievable challenge, and that last third being where you're kind of racing with your guts, racing with your confidence in your training. And so these are all strategies to deal with nervousness. All right, that fear of failure, which is what nervousness is, and the way to fight fear of failure is with confidence and experience. Confidence and experience with your training, an understanding of your own abilities of what you've been doing, what you can do in the present, and then extrapolating that out to set realistic goals for the future. And I think that'll be another video that I'll talk about, is kind of setting those kind of longer term goals and my suggestions for that. And so definitely kind of make sure that you're subscribing to the channel and following along, and I'll get that video, maybe I'll get that out in the next week or two, because I think it's a good one, especially going into the spring season. So that's it. All right, so that's my talk about kind of dealing with nervousness and addressing it with a confidence and an understanding of your own ability, partitioning out kind of your expectations for yourself, setting step goals and kind of pushing through each of those step goals, and not allowing yourself to kind of get overwhelmed. All right, and I will say kind of a final thing, especially for those youth athletes, is kind of, you know, when you're using rowing and you have a pressure certainly of college and setting certain time standards for college, is like looking at that and looking far down the line with those standards is not going to help you. All right, is like your goals must always be set based on where you are and where you've been, and this is a big issue in the sport. The sport loves to say, determine what your goal is and work back from that. It's horrible advice, absolutely horrible. It leads to horrible, inefficient training. It leads to kind of burnout. It is just not good, because you can't base what your abilities are based on the future in a place that you haven't been yet. You always have to base things based on what is rather than what you hope to be. And so I'll leave that as my parting thoughts. If you guys got questions, comments, certainly if you want to share your own strategies for kind of dealing with things, put them down in the comments below. All right, the more people have this conversation, the more helpful it can be. And so please share, please kind of commune, and kind of come together on this common challenge that everybody deals with, is nervousness before hard workouts and nervousness between races. And actually, I will say, I said my parting thought was already there, but it will not be. This is what I tell my athletes when they tell me that they're nervous and they're having struggle with nervousness, is I will tell them, when you stop being nervous, it is time to retire. All right, because that means you don't care. It means you don't care about what's happening, all right? Because nervousness is a natural byproduct of having a challenge and going after a challenge. And when you stop feeling that nervousness for that challenge, you've either set a very low bar for yourself that is well within the achievable and is not pushing thresholds, or it's simply not important enough to you anymore. All right, and so embrace that. All right, embrace the nervousness, because it means that you're doing something that's valuable and important, and that you should keep doing it. All right, so good luck, everybody. Have fun with your training. We'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.